As one is one is one. Inside yourself or your father. All is none, all is none, all is one. It's time to call time from behind you. The illusion has
Welcome
been
to
just
Spooky
a
Ass Shit.
dream.
This is part 2 of our special exclusive coverage of the Manson family. Now, I meant to get through the entire build-up to the murders in episode 1, but guess what? Didn't even get halfway there. So, unfortunately, my friends from Death by Champagne, Mac and Olivia, are not available to continue this episode, although we did record a little bit more than what you heard on episode 1. So I might splice in some of their comments to this episode, which will sound a little bit weird because I already have another guest here with me in my studio apartment. Emily Ferguson, welcome back to the show.
Delighted to be back.
Now, I told the ladies from Death by Champagne, and I'll tell you too, I think it's good to have young women in particular on these early episodes because it's about the early life of the family, and the family is really mostly made up of young women. In fact, not to throw shade on you, but younger than you even.
I would say by a decade or more. Yeah. Sometimes at least a decade and a half, in fact.
Yeah. So, I mean, he liked him real young is something that we started to learn in last week's episode. Yeah. So, Emily, you were saying that you actually don't know much about the Manson family.
Yeah, way less even than I thought, which was already pretty low. But listening to the last episodes, I was like, oh, I don't know anything about this. Like, I recognize some of the names, but I didn't even know that much about the murders other than that, like, okay, something Sharon Tate and it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this will be a learning experience for me.
All right. Well, but the good news is you listened to the first episode, so you're at least up to speed there.
Yes.
Which is the important thing. So we don't have time to futz around anymore.
All right.
I'm not even going to do the plugs.
Let's move
We're
on.
going to get right into this because I have 6 pages of like bullet notes.
Good
Not
Lord.
even like notes, bullet notes.
Yeah.
To get through and riff on.
What an appropriate characterization.
All right. So when last we left the family,
Yeah.
they had just moved down from the Haight to L.A.
Mm-hmm.
Manson is still working on his music career and trying to get those connections going. To that end, he is sending his girls out to places like the Sunset Strip in the hopes that they will just happen to bump into a famous rock star who might be able to help Charles Manson with his music career.
Well, there's an idea.
The thing is, this plan actually works.
I hate that his shit works.
In the spring of 1968, family members Pat, Patricia, Katie Krenwinkel,
right, yeah.
and another family member known as Yeller
Okay.
are hitchhiking on the Sunset Strip when a man in a very expensive-looking car pulls up and offers them a ride. The girls get in the car. The man asks them where they're going, and they tell them, and he says, okay, ladies, I'll drive you home, but first, would you be interested in coming to my house for some milk and cookies?
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Is this a quote or is this your...
No, that's what he actually said.
Okay, that sounds great. Yes, do that.
Well, the girls are agreeable.
As they have already proven themselves to be just by being there in the first place.
Yeah.
So good.
And he says, oh, by the way, my name is Dennis Wilson.
Okay. Oh my God.
Now, that doesn't mean anything to the girls. Do you know who Dennis Wilson is?
You know, I know that name, but I don't know why.
Probably you might remember his more famous brother, Brian Wilson.
Oh, yes. Beach Boys.
Of the Beach Boys.
There we
Exactly.
go.
Yes. Brian Wilson, kind of the leader of the Beach Boys, the main
Yeah.
songwriter of the Beach Boys. That's Dennis's brother.
Okay.
Dennis is the drummer in the Beach Boys.
Oh, all right.
But the girls didn't realize this at the time, even though the Beach Boys, we think of them now as a popular 60s band.
Yeah.
And they were. But they weren't exactly what, like, hip people
like hip young. Yeah,
were listening
exactly.
to.
Yeah.
They were kind of like glorified barbershop,
Yeah, that's fair.
you know?
Yeah.
So,
I love
so
the Beach Boys. Probably for that.
yeah, there's a lot of Beach Boys songs that I like too.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But, you know, I
Yeah.
like, I mean, 60s pop music is my main
Oh,
thing,
yeah, of
you know?
course.
So, but anyway, so he brings them to his house, and he really does serve them cookies and milk, by the way. Raw milk, which is all he drinks, but he does serve them cookies and milk. And I'm sure they get up to some other activities as well.
Yeah.
But in any event,
Ugh.
the girls go home eventually, and they tell Charlie, hey, we just met this guy, Dennis Wilson, and he must be some kind of famous guy or rich guy or something because he's got this really fancy log cabin on Sunset, and it's like, there's a sprawling estate and there's a pool. It's like really fancy. Manson knows exactly who Dennis Wilson is.
Sure he does.
And he's like, this is the break I've been looking for. Take me to that house right now.
Oh, boy.
So they go to the house. Wilson isn't home.
Okay.
But Manson doesn't let that stop him and the family. They just make themselves right at home in Wilson's house.
Wait, so they just, go into his house?
Yeah, they let themselves in.
Sure. Why wouldn't they?
And they should start having a party.
Sounds great.
Now, Dennis Wilson comes home that night, and he sees the lights on in his house, and he thinks, that's weird.
Yeah.
Then he sees people coming out onto the porch, and he thinks, stranger still.
Yeah.
And they're all kind of like dirty-looking, hippie-looking people. And he says, this probably isn't good.
This is why you never let a hippie into your house in the first place. It's just trouble.
Charles Manson comes out with a big grin on his face. And Dennis Wilson approaches and he says, are you going to hurt me? And Manson just looks at him and says, do I look like I'm going to hurt you?
I mean, yeah.
I think that was kind of Dennis's response too.
Yeah.
Because to show that he had no ill intent, Manson holds up his hands, bends down on his knees,
What?
and kisses Wilson's feet.
Wow.
And then he says, come on in, meet the girls.
So come on into your house. I have brought friends.
Yeah. And that's, Dennis was like, he kind of welcomed me into my own house. But
what the hell?
But the thing is, Dennis sits with Charlie for a while and he becomes honestly enamored by this guy.
God.
He's like, wait, so this is your group? And he's like, yeah, and I write songs and we all sing my songs and the girls do, whatever I say because, for out of love.
Yeah.
And so he's like, yeah, it's a real hip scene. And Dennis Wilson is honest to God impressed and freaked out by all this in a good way. He's like, oh, this is great. Now, him and his brothers, with the success of the Beach Boys, started their own record label called, appropriately enough, Brother Records.
Oh, okay.
And the original idea was that any of the brothers, the Wilson brothers, could find anybody that they found interesting and sign them to a record deal.
Oh, wow.
So that's what Dennis Wilson wanted to do for Charles Manson.
Okay.
But, unfortunately, Charlie's a little bit late. Because around this time, the Beach Boys had gotten into a guru. In fact, I believe it's the same guru that the Beatles got into.
What?
Yeah. And so they started touring with him. So this Indian guru would come out and give an hour-long speech about meditation before the start of the Beach Boys concert.
How in the hell is that beneficial to a Beach Boys concert vibe?
Turns out it wasn't.
Yeah, ooh.
Because this plan lasted about 2 concerts before everyone was like, what the fuck is this?
Sucks.
And they had to cancel
God.
the remaining tour dates.
Oh,
which
man.
cost them a shit ton of money.
So they canceled the tour dates rather than just kicking this douche to the curb.
I don't know all the
Who
details,
knows?
but
Yeah,
that
sure.
that
I'm
was
sure
the
their
deal.
logic was sound.
So this whole idea of you can sign anyone you want to our record label, that was off the table now.
Yeah, sounds
So
like
now they still had to audition like you would for any other record company. But Brian's like, well, that's fine. We'll get this worked out. He says, I've got some music industry contacts, and I want you to meet Greg Jacobson, who is a well-known guy in the inner music circles, and he arranges studio sessions, and he's kind of a talent scout for different people, and he also has been helping Dennis Wilson write songs that are for consideration for his own solo album that he plans, and also for a possible Beach Boys album that they're working on.
All right.
And Jacobson shows up and meets Manson and the girls, and he is, he enjoys Manson, but he really likes the girls.
Huh.
Especially Ruth Ann Moorehouse.
Okay.
Now, Ruth Ann came up a lot in the last episode. She's going to come up a lot in this episode.
Okay.
She's kind of the belle of the ball.
Yeah.
She's the one that all the men seem to fall in love with. Keep in mind, she was 14 years old when
Yep.
she joined the family, and that was only maybe a year ago, maybe, if we're being
Yeah.
generous. So she's 14 or 15 at this time.
Woo. Well, she's probably quiet and retiring, which is certainly appealing to powerful dudes.
As far as Greg Jacobson's opinion of Manson, he says that he liked Manson and, his songs were okay, but it was really more the whole vibe around Manson that he enjoyed. And he did actually think that there was something there that a record company could use. In fact, not just a record company. He was thinking more along the lines of a documentary movie or maybe even a stand-up comedian.
Whoa. Wow. That is a ship that I'm very sad has sailed.
Yeah.
That would have been a whole different thing there.
Well, because he said, like, what Manson has, it's not so much the musical talent, it's
Right.
just the overall vibe and his appearance.
Obviously, he has charisma
Right.
coming out of somewhere because, wow, he enchants these people.
So Wilson attempts to sign Charlie to Brother Records. But again, now it can't just be one person say so. All the brothers have to agree. And the other people listen to some like preliminary recordings, and they're just not really impressed with Charles Manson.
Well, I guess 'cause the point is the recordings are not the thing. Like, the spectacle and him.
Right.
Like, that's the draw.
And Manson had done some recordings earlier, we talked about in the first episode.
Right.
And they didn't come out as, well as anybody hoped, but Charles himself especially. But that's kind of what he had to show off. And, they were getting, passed around and everything, but no one was really impressed. But Wilson likes having Manson around. He likes having the girls around. He also likes that Manson starts to control orgy parties at the house. Now, there are conflicting reports as to how often these orgy parties happened within the family. Some family members say, yes, Charlie did this. He would orchestrate it, and he was in control of everything. Other people say, they might have happened a handful of times, but it's way exaggerated in the press and everything. And some of the family, even some of the ex-family members are exaggerating because, that's the story they want to tell.
Sure.
The problem with this Manson family story in general is we have almost nothing but unreliable narrators telling us the story.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all either criminals or lawyers who are trying to become celebrities.
Yeah.
Or people who have a stake in the story in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So everybody that says anything, we kind of have to take with a grain of salt.
Sure, that's fair.
Neil Young stops by Dennis Wilson's house.
The hell you say?
Yeah, and he meets Charles Manson, and he is very impressed.
Of course he is.
Not only does he like Manson's music, but also the way that Charles Manson, and this comes up a lot of people say this about him, he improvises songs.
Okay.
He's a really good musical improv guy.
Huh.
And he's like, he just comes up so fast with these songs. So this is going to be great. He tries to work on people in the music industry for Manson, but again, the people that he sends tapes to, not interested.
Not so much, yeah.
So Charlie sees that his plan of befriending rock stars isn't going to be enough to get him the record contract that he wants. Because as powerful as they may seem to your average civilian, rock stars don't actually have power in the music industry.
This is true.
So he says, what I need is a producer.
Yeah.
Those are the people with power. I need to make a connection with a rock and roll producer. He asks Jacobson to introduce him to one of his producer friends, and Jacobson says, oh, Terry Melcher would be a good guy for you to hook up with.
Uh-huh.
Terry Melcher is the son of Doris Day,
Oh, wow.
but he's a 26-year-old, like, whiz kid at Capitol Records. And,
Okay.
like, he's become, like, their new, like, eye for talent.
Sure.
And
okay.
he's signing new bands that are becoming hits. He's got a good ear for music. He's dating and living with Candace Bergen.
Jeez.
And this guy is going
All right, so
places.
he's the guy, yeah.
They live in a fancy mansion on Cielo Drive.
Interesting.
So Jacobson invites Melcher to come visit Charles Manson and family at Dennis Wilson's house.
Okay.
Now, the family was staying with Dennis a lot, but they weren't necessarily living there. They still had other places. They still had other places they would go to. They even went to Spahn Ranch sometimes. Now, Spahn Ranch is a movie ranch we're going to talk about a lot later on.
Yeah.
But Spahn Ranch is like an old movie studio cowboy ranch that they used to film like cowboy shows and westerns in the 50s.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
They live there, though, at some point, yes?
The
Or,
family
they
will
posted up
eventually
there?
all live there.
Okay, that's
But at
after
this
then.
point, yeah, they're just kind of feeling it out. Someone had found it. The owner is an 80-year-old blind man.
Okay.
And he's like, yeah, you guys can stay here sometimes if you help out around the ranch and stuff, you know. But we'll get more into that later because they're not there full time yet. But that's one of the places that they would stop. But
Okay,
there's
so
also
they're just kind of like squatting and
there's
couch
also
surfing
a place talked about on the last episode called the Spiral Staircase. There's also going to be a place called the Yellow Submarine, which is a yellow apartment building they stay in sometimes. So they have places kind of all over.
Yeah.
But they also sometimes stay with Dennis Wilson. So Terry Melcher comes with Greg Jacobson to Dennis Wilson's house to meet Charles Manson and the Manson family. He too is very impressed with the women. He too has an eye for Ruth Ann Moorehouse.
Golly.
Such an eye, in fact, that he hooks up with her. And Greg Jacobson, you know, you might think he'd be bothered by this,
Right.
but it's the 60s, man, and like,
Right. Free
you know,
love,
people
sure.
don't belong to people. And also, like, in the pecking order, Melcher's a little bit higher,
Yeah,
so
sure.
he gets dibs on what he wants, right? But he really liked Ruth Ann, so much so that he wanted Ruth Ann to move in to the house at Cielo Drive and be his housekeeper.
Whoa.
He brought her by.
Ugh.
Candace Bergen was there, and she was like, "This is not happening."
No way. You ain't bringing the 16-year-old up in here.
Probably 14 or 15, but
Yeah,
yes.
I guess.
So Jacobson is trying to describe to his industry friends, you know, Charles Manson and the Manson girls, the whole thing that's going on there. And he's like, yeah, I think they'd be like a great subject for a documentary. I think it would be really interesting. And of course the music could be a part of it, but really the whole vibe is what you want to see. You know, you want to see Charlie and his followers. Well, they're not really followers because they all talk about how they have their own minds and no one's really the leader, but it's more like, it's kind of like a family. So some sources,
And there we are.
some sources credit Greg Jacobson with naming them the family.
Oh, wow.
And say that sometimes they would call themselves the family after this. Again, as I talked about on the last
Right.
episode, that's a little bit disputed.
Debatable.
We don't know.
Yeah, sure.
But anyway.
There's that.
Now, Charlie, at this point, he starts to hang out with Wilson, Jacobson, and Melcher, and he kind of tags along. He's like the tag-along little brother that nobody asked for.
Great.
But he goes with them to the Whiskey A Go-Go and like other nightclubs, and he's hitting the town with them, and he kind of starts to think of himself as one of them, even though they definitely do not consider him one of them.
No.
And Melcher is like pointedly not inviting Manson into his life, really, because he's like, I'm not really interested in this scraggly little
Smart
man.
move.
But they give him a drive home one night, and so Manson does go to Cielo Drive,
Okay.
where Melcher lives. But Melcher pointedly does not invite any of them in. He just says, thanks, see you later.
Yep.
But Manson does note the address
He knows
and
where he
is
lives.
impressed.
Oh, boy.
Charlie suggests to Wilson that they write songs together, and Wilson agrees. But Charlie then takes it on himself to start writing songs on his own. And he writes a bunch of songs, but one of the songs that he writes is a song called Cease to Exist. And he says that he wrote it for Wilson because it's about how the other Beach Boys, the brothers, need to give up their own ego and work as a unit if they're going to be successful. But if you listen to the lyrics, it's clearly Manson talking to a woman and telling her to submit to him.
Wow. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, the lyrics are, submission is a gift, give it to your brother.
Wow. Yep.
And
He had a theme, though.
some people have pointed out that it sounds a lot like Nights in White Satin, which is a Moody Blues
Oh, okay.
song.
Yeah.
And we know for a fact that Manson was a Moody Blues fan.
Okay.
He only allowed two types of music, two groups to
Yeah.
be listened to at the Spahn Ranch when they
Sure.
get there. It's the Beatles and the Moody
yeah.
Blues. That's it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Manson, when he hands over the song, he says, listen, you guys can do whatever you want to the music. Do not change the lyrics.
All right.
The lyrics are my thing.
Committed to his craft.
Do whatever you want for the music. Make it sound however you want. Now, at this point, an old frenemy of the family shows up. Dean Moorehouse.
Oh, wow. Here he
Ruth
goes.
Ann's father. The Santa-looking guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, he's the one that had pulled a shotgun on Charlie earlier.
Yeah.
Charlie
Calm him down
diffuse
or-
that situation.
Yep.
They introduced him to LSD, and it blew his mind.
Sure.
And now Dean says, hey, I'm ready for a new way of life. I want to officially join the family. I want to be a family member. I want to hang out with you and the girls. So he starts hanging out with at Dennis Wilson's house.
Whoa.
He gets a little handsy with some of the ladies. And the ladies are like, Charlie, look, we'll do whatever you say, but we don't like this dude.
Yeah.
He's like an old man.
I say he's way older than anybody.
His daughter is here, like
Yeah.
fucking everybody.
Yeah.
And now he's in here trying to fuck everybody. And he's like this old Santa looking dude.
Yeah.
And Charlie's like, yeah, we don't need this guy hanging around. So he says, hey, Dean Moorehouse, kick rocks. But it's Dennis Wilson's house. And Dennis Wilson is like, I kind of like this dude.
Oh boy, here we
I'm
go.
going to let him live here. And I'm going to hire him to be my gardener and my handyman.
What the fuck is going through the minds of these people? Honestly.
So, even though he's not a family member, Dean Moorehouse is still hanging around the family. This is around the time that we meet Tex Watson.
Oh, here he comes.
Charles Tex Watson.
Mm.
Now, I'm not going to give you the full story because I actually talked about this with my friends from Death by Champagne.
Okay.
So let's let them tell the story.
So, he was born in 1945 in Farmersville, Texas, which sounds fake. He grew up in nearby Copeville in a family that had high standards and good morals, and he said of this family later in life that they went to church, but it didn't take. So, he seemed to excel at everything he did. In high school, he was an honors student, he led a youth group, he was the editor of the school paper, he, could do no wrong. Everything he did, he was just the golden boy. September of 1964, he moves to Denton, attends the University of North Texas, where he joined a fraternity, and this was his first foray into rule breaking of any kind. The most misconduct he participated in during his college years was the theft of 4 typewriters during a scavenger hunt for Rush Week. You have eyelashes on your nose.
Thank you. I could feel them falling out.
But he was so nervous, he stole the typewriters for whatever reason. He's like, it was easy to do. I just busted the windows out, laughing, drunk, took them. And then the next day he woke up and the beer wore off and he was like, oh God, what did I do? So he turns himself in. He calls a lawyer, calls his parents. They all make this plan to go turn him in. And he's dealt with it so proactively that they don't press charges.
Yeah.
They're clearly, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
But it's fine. So the pastor from his church when he was younger sent a message to him and was like, don't get wrapped up in that. You better take a step back and separate yourself.
Ooh.
And he said that's why the Methodist Church doesn't condone drinking. Look what you did. And Tex said, I wasn't interested in what he had to say about character or moral stamina. I wasn't interested in counsel and the prayers that he offered. I was too busy having fun. Just a little bit into his mindset. So as he's moving through college, he constantly has in the back of his mind, how did I ever live under my parents' thumb and deal with that religious lifestyle? Because he was into it. Mm-hmm. Even when he went to college, he noticed how a little bit less strict it was. And then later, as he moves to California, he's like, this is insane. He realizes, what a square he was before. And really gets into, now that he has that self-awareness, he has to correct it and totally get rid of it. He had one visit with his mother after that. She went to California to see him. And he was living in an apartment with a friend. And she noticed all the comings and goings, people in and out. And what she didn't know was that they were selling and using drugs behind her back. While she was there, she just knew that it was shady and she didn't like it. So she cut the trip short and left and begged him to go home with her. And he said, I'm never going home again. And it was the last time he spoke to her in person. And she would never see him again as a free man.
Oh, damn.
So this is about the time when, through the wonder of hitchhiking, he meets Dennis Wilson. But I have in here that he picked up Dennis Wilson because Dennis Wilson had wrecked a Ferrari and a Rolls Royce, and he didn't have any cars left, so he resorted to using his thumb. Yes. So he picks him up, which is totally random, but I think they all get into this mindset of we can do whatever we want. We're going to be able to meet all these people because the hippies and the celebrities are living as one group. They're
Right.
very intertwined because you have posers, you have celebrities who came for money acting like dirty hippies. You have hippies that want to live the reverse, and so everybody just benefits mutually from this like
Yes.
perpetual clusterfuck of nothing good. So Dennis invites him in for coffee. He's like, yeah, come on inside. There's a ton of people in here to hang out with. Just make some friends. So he's like, what? He knows who Dennis Wilson is because his brother, who was way more straight-laced than him, was like, haha, bet you'll never meet the Beach Boys. Like, wouldn't that be a story? And he's like, holy shit, I did it. So he goes into his house, and a man named Dean walks up to him with a big gray beard and was like, you got to meet Charlie, man. Come over here to the couch. It's Dean Moorehouse, Ruth Ann's dad.
Oh.
So he walks over, meets him, and Tex said in his own book, he looked up, Watson recalled, and the first thing I felt was a gentleness, an embracing kind of acceptance and love.
You have a terrible rate of character.
From a look. One look.
Tex picks up the story from there.
Dennis had already relaxed on the couch, and I was listening to Charlie's music. So Dean and I joined them as a couple of the girls served us sandwiches and coffee. It was like the girls were slaves, and the men were kings meant to be served. There was this big chunk of hashish on the coffee table. As we smoked it and listened to Manson's love songs, I began to see why people looked up to Charlie. As he smiled at me, it seemed he could see right into me. It was like love filled the air. I left that night on cloud 9. I'm sure the hash had a great deal to do with it, but I couldn't believe what had just happened, and I couldn't wait to come back.
So he's just an idiot kid.
Yeah.
He just went to a party and got fucked up in the right way for the first time.
Yes.
And was like, this situation
This
is love. Who didn't go to the first party in college where, like, you made friends with the random guy next to you? Some girl offered to give you some of her beer. Another guy gives you whatever
It's
pill.
just
And you're
this-
just like,
yeah,
yeah,
this
man.
moment.
Like, that's the type of college that I went to.
Yeah.
Like, everybody, I went to school in Carbondale, Illinois, and everybody is just like, whatever you need, come into my house, drink out of my keg, have a beer. If you want pills, somebody has them upstairs. If you want weed, go out back. Like, everything is, if you have a party, everything's open to anyone. And this relationship with drugs is what continually drives him back to Manson and what presses him down into, like, he just keeps continuing to devolve.
I told my mother, well, I've met that Jesus you preach about all the time. I've met him, and he's here right now with me. Charlie was Jesus. He was my Messiah, my Savior, my soul. He could ask anything, even my life, and it was his.
He kind of lives on the fringe of the family. He's not accepted for a while because he can't kick that idea that they're so into that, like, everyone belongs to everyone and yourself, and, like, we don't own possessions. He keeps, like, making minor fuck-ups that are human and normal, but by Charlie's standards, he's using them as these ways to say, like, you're not ready. I can't accept you as a child because you're not. You're using people's credit cards. You're doing weird stuff. Like, he gets into trouble with Dean at one point. They're at Dennis's house, but Dennis isn't there. And Dean starts trying to get some girl to sleep with him. And apparently it, like, wasn't one of the Manson girls. It was, like, another fringe hanger-on. And he just gets word that, like, the vibe is ruined at his house because of the way that Dean's acting, and Tex is close to Dean. So there's just all these fringe... He just lives
With
out
fringe
here.
people.
He lives out here for a while.
Yes.
And this whole time, too, he's, like, going from apartment to apartment. He, at one point, sells all of his stuff, and he tells Charlie, he's like, take it, whatever I need to do. I'll get rid of everything. I'll leave it behind.
Now, Charlie is smart enough to know that this deal that he has going with Dennis Wilson, where the family just comes and stays there whenever they please, that's not going to last forever. Something's going to change, and the family needs some kind of base of operations separate. So he sends the girls out scouting for places. And they find a place. They find an apartment, and Susan Atkins and some of the other girls are living there, but they fuck it up because they're giving out drugs in this apartment. And the neighbors are like, hey, these hippies moved in, and now, like, our teenage son, this is literally something that happened.
Yeah.
Our teenage son is, like, in the fetal position barking in the front yard.
For God's sake.
So police come, and they arrest everybody in the family.
Yeah.
Well, not everybody in the family. Everybody
Who's
that's
there?
staying in that apartment.
Yeah.
So Charlie gets a phone call at Wilson's place saying that this has happened. And he's like, oh, Christ, I can't go to L.A. now because I'm here in Hollywood with Dennis Wilson. I can't run out and deal with this shit when I'm trying to hobnob with Terry Melcher and all this thing. Who can I call to straighten this out for me? I know. I'll call my old friend and family associate, Bobby Beausoleil.
Oh, wow. Hey.
So if you remember him from the first episode,
Yep.
now he's coming back.
Okay.
So he comes back into the story, and he has a new girl with him. Because remember, he kind of had his own little entourage of girls.
Yeah, sure.
He's got a new one, a girl by the name of Leslie Van Houten. Leslie had been, kicking around California as a rebellious teen as well. Her parents got divorced when she was 14. This seems to have set her, emotionally down a dark alley, and she started using drugs and all kinds of things, got into this counterculture in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Now, she meets up with Bobby Beausoleil, and they mention that they're going on a trip, him and some of these girls, and would she like to come along? And to her, this sounds like a fun hippie adventure.
Well, sure.
So why not? That's what you did back in these days, right?
I guess.
One of the girls that was with Bobby at this time is Gypsy Cher. Now, Gypsy had been introduced in the last episode because she was already with Bobby.
Yeah.
But she was kind of on the border of becoming a family member when last we left.
Right.
And she still wants to become a family member at this time. So she says, Leslie, Bobby Beausoleil is really nice, and it's cool that we're like hanging out with him. But Charles Manson, he's where it's at. Because he's going to be a rock star, and he's probably Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
I ended up in San Francisco staying at some friend's house that I had known from Pasadena, and she had gone out and come back with Bobby Beausoleil and Catherine Scher and another woman. And they were from the Spahn Ranch, and Catherine Scher really wanted me to go down with them. And I was at a point where I was really down. I wasn't really put together enough to pursue a job. I was identifying with the idea that 9-to-5 jobs were the establishment, I was already on my way, bucking what my parents had been and all that, questioning things. Cher said to me, if you want to come with us, you have to cut your past loose. So I called Mom, and I told her that I'm dropping out and I'm going away, so don't expect to hear from me again. And I did, and I went with them.
Now, those girls that had been arrested in L.A., it turns out it was all a bunch of nothing because they were sentenced to time served. So they were found guilty for drug crimes, but they were sentenced to time served and released.
Okay.
So
no big deal.
No huge deal. Bobby Beausoleil doesn't have to get too involved, but now he's back in contact with the family, and he's going to become a recurring character. Charlie, meanwhile, is still acting like he's part of Wilson's gang. In fact, he's acting like he's part of Terry Melcher's gang. And this is kind of given a bad image to Dennis Wilson because Melcher doesn't really care for Manson. And this is like just the beginning of Wilson starting to be like, hey, you know what? Maybe these people aren't as cool as I thought.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not so great to be hanging out with them. But Dennis Wilson's like, you know what? I kind of want to end this like full-time relationship that I have with Charles Manson and his family.
How long has this been going on at this point?
It's like the summer long, basically.
Oh, wow.
It's going to be the summer
so
long.
months they've been there.
Yeah.
Right.
And he's like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set him up with a recording session at my brother Brian's house at his home studio. And I'm even going to give him our personal engineer. He's going to be working with the Beach Boys recording engineer.
Jeez.
Well, that's the thing. You get amazed. It's like Manson got further than he, as my previous guest said, further than he had any right to expect.
Absolutely.
That he would get. Yeah, in his own mind, he was never given,
No, of course not.
credit
Well,
enough.
when you're Jesus.
World enough.
I mean.
Yeah. So he sets up this recording session. But the first night in the house goes exactly the same as his other recording sessions have. He doesn't like being told what to do. He doesn't like being told where to place the mic. He doesn't like being told how loud to sing or where to place the guitar. And he just doesn't want to listen to this fancy producer. His name's Stephen Despair, by the way.
Okay.
Or Despar.
First one was better.
Yeah. So Despar says, you know what? Maybe he's just nervous. Like he's in a celebrity's house and Brian's being, Brian had his own mental health issues throughout time.
Sure.
And he's being a little cranky anyway. He's refusing to come out and even say hello to Manson.
Probably for the best.
Yeah. And so he's like, you know what? Why don't we try this again tomorrow night? We'll do another recording session. So he's given another chance. But guess what? How do you think this recording session goes?
Let me see. Statistically speaking, very much like the others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bad. But it gets worse.
Oh.
Because this time, Manson gets so heated that he pulls a knife on Despard.
Oh my God. Whoa.
So Despard says, this guy's a fucking psycho.
Yeah.
And this session is over. See ya.
Wow. Good.
And that's the end of the session.
Holy hell.
Dennis Wilson, keep doing that.
Yeah.
Dennis Wilson is like, well, all right, man, whatever, but let me listen to the recording, see if anything came out of it. And there's a couple songs on there that he thinks are actually pretty good. And he says, brother's not going to sign him to a recording contract now, but maybe he could still work with me as a songwriter, and that way he's kind of like on the outside. It's not a big deal. And maybe I'll bring one of these songs to the Beach Boys and we can record it. Wow. And, that way he's kind of still like in the industry, but it's not my responsibility to like make him a rock star.
Man, he is still clinging on to this relationship, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
In a way.
Yeah.
So now, at the end of the summer, the Beach Boys go on tour. While he's gone, the family is staying at his house full time now. The Beach Boys manager calls Dennis aside one day and he says, Dennis, we're on tour right now. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, so how come I'm getting an $800 milk bill from your house?
Oh my God.
He's like, there's no way you're not home. How are you having $800 worth of milk delivered to your house this week?
The cookie bill had to be even worse.
So Wilson finds out that, yes, the family are living in his house and they're charging things to his regular accounts.
Finds out as in he didn't know they were just going to camp out there.
Well, debatable, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he didn't.
But he talks with the manager and they do the math and they figure out that in the few months that the family has spent there, they have probably cost him over $100,000.
Holy God. Wow. Well, there's a grip of them.
Yeah.
Well,
now
orgies ain't cheap.
Now Wilson says, all right, that's finally it. I'm going to end this. I'm going to be rid of the Manson family.
Yeah, sure you are.
But he's not really much for confrontation.
Yeah, sounds like a bit of a puss.
So the way he handles it is he lets his lease expire on the house and just moves. Just kind of quietly moves out.
Okay. I mean, had he known really who he was dealing with, that might have actually been a wise choice. Yeah. So maybe I'm going to throw him this one.
So the Manson family is informed of this, but Charlie's not too perturbed because he's like, all right, we're all going to go to Spahn Ranch.
Okay.
And before we go, I'm taking some of these gold records you got lying around.
Damn right. Yeah.
And he takes a bunch of other stuff, from Wilson.
Sure.
Now, Wilson, like I said, he kind of liked that song Cease to Exist. He brought it to the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys said, yeah, Dennis, I guess, yeah, we can work with this. Dennis does not give Manson credit for writing the song.
Ooh.
The Beach Boys changed the lyrics.
Oh.
And they changed the title from Cease to Exist to Never Learn Not to Love.
Wow.
And they put it on their upcoming album, 2020. Now, Wilson thinks this is only fair because this way he'll get all the songwriting royalties that may come from this, record and this single that's going to be released. And that will be Manson's way of paying back Dennis Wilson, right?
I'm sure Manson saw it exactly the same way.
He'll be perfectly reasonable about this. But still, Dennis Wilson must have had enough brains in his head to know that, this might not work out the way he hoped. And he doesn't actually mention it to Manson. He just calls Manson and says, hey, man, I'm going to record your song.
Oh, he even tells him?
Yeah.
Jeez. Wow. So you can have talent, but just no sense. So
the family moves to Spahn Ranch full time. George Spahn is, like I said, a 80-something-year-old blind man. And at first he says that, yeah, some of you young kids can move in here. But it turns out dozens of people are moving in. And they're living on the ranch. Now, the ranch is a working ranch, as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They have horses and stables, and they do tours. They do guided trail rides and stuff like that. They don't really do filming anymore, but I suppose if the opportunity came up, they might. But it used to, they have all these facades of Western town.
Oh my
And they have a
gosh.
couple full-size buildings, like the saloon is a full-size building, and the hotel, I think, was a full-size building. A couple of the facades are actual buildings.
Okay. So there's places to squat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the family starts spending time there, and Charlie says, "Hey, man, George, here's the deal. My family's going to live here, but in return, my girls are going to be nice to you. In fact, you can have this one here." And he pulls up Lynette Fromey, which, by the way, I've learned recently that her name is actually pronounced Fromey. I've always said
What?
Frome. I've only ever heard people say Frome.
Yeah.
I learned recently from her herself
What?
that her name is pronounced Fromey. That's why you heard it that way on the credits last episode, even though I pronounced it incorrectly earlier in the episode.
Oh my
and that's why
gosh.
from now on you'll hear it as Fromey.
That's going to take some adjusting, but okay.
Yeah. So he says, you can have Lynette Fromey. This is going to be your girl, and she's going to do whatever you say, and she's going to take care of you, and we will help out with the ranch.
Okay.
Like, we'll clean the stalls, we'll feed the horses, we'll do whatever's got to be done. And George is like, man, I'm 80-something.
Yep.
Whatever.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Go ahead. Now, he does begin a relationship with Lynette, because, of course, Lynette does whatever Charlie says.
Sure.
And she even would say later on that she did actually fall in love with George Spahn,
Wow.
because he was such a wonderful guy.
Okay.
And he gives her the nickname of Squeaky.
Oh.
And depending on which version of the story, neither one of them are great,
Okay.
this is because either she squeaks when he pinches her on the behind
Okay.
as she walks by, or because these are the squeaky noises she makes when they make love.
I see.
But in any event, the name sticks,
Yeah.
and she becomes known within the family, and later on, when she becomes sort of a celebrity of the family
Yeah.
during the trial, as Squeaky.
Yeah.
He's also the one who gives Charles Watson his nickname,
Oh.
because he notices that Charles has a Texas accent, and he starts calling him Tex.
Yeah.
So now the family calls him Tex. And Charlie likes that anyway, because there can only be one Charles in the family.
Yeah. I wondered how it went on that
Yeah.
long, frankly.
But getting a new name or a nickname was kind of par for the course for the family anyway. Tex Watson remembers it this way.
Part of Manson's method of breaking our ties to the past and our usual perceptions of ourselves and the world was giving all family members new names.
And keep in mind, Tex at this time is still not a full family member.
Oh, wow.
When they moved to Spahn, Charles Watson, future Tex, and Dean Moorehouse wanted to come along. But Charlie's like, Dean, I already told you, you ain't joining the family.
Right.
And he's like, and as for you, Charles Watson, I mean, I guess you can hang around if you want, but look, if you guys want to hang out, fine. But you got to live off the property in some tents.
Oh, wow.
So they live like on the outskirts of the property in some tents and will come in. And now Tex Watson is real eager to prove himself to Charles Manson and to the family.
Okay. No,
Set-
wait. So
setting some seeds here.
when you're saying in the family, like, what does it take to be in the family? Is it just that Charlie decides you're in?
Charlie has the say so, yeah.
Okay. So
But there's a couple things that he looks for in general, and I'm
Okay.
glad you asked this question.
Yeah.
From men, mostly what he wants is skills. If you are a good mechanic, a good electrician, if there's something that you can do for the family
Okay.
that's useful, but also just muscle. He likes having muscle
Sure.
around. He likes having people protect him because he's not a big guy.
No.
He is a pretty tough guy.
Clearly.
He's willing to fight, but he's not a big guy. And he needs people to help keep the women in line too, because he's always teaching that men are superior to women. The Bible even says women have to be subordinate to men and all this stuff. So
Sure.
that too. And he doesn't mind sharing.
Yeah. I just
So-
don't want to be completely outnumbered.
Right. But he also really likes bikers. We're going to learn about that in a little bit.
Oh.
Because of, again, the muscle connection, but also
Sure.
drugs. And so if you had something useful for him. Now, women, he was pickier with. Because it took a lot more than just being, willing and able. He's got a lot of willing and able women
Sure.
that are ready to perform. Do you have money? Do you have skills? Mostly money.
Mostly money. Yeah.
That's what he was looking for. Do you have a driver's license, which becomes important later
Ah.
on? Do you have because a lot of his people were teenage runaways
Well,
that
yeah,
didn't have
sure.
these, these kinds of things. So now when the family moves to the ranch, like I said, this was an actual working ranch, which means that there were actual working ranch hands living there already, or working there at least. Some of them living there,
Yeah.
some of them just working there. Their leader was a guy named Juan Flynn. He was the head rancher, and he turned out to be pretty much okay with the family. They would report to him every morning, and he would assign them tasks to do around the ranch. More or less, they kind of got along. Then there was Johnny Schwartz, who actually became a friend of the family, an associate of the family. He would let them borrow his car a lot of times. And then there was Donald Shorty Shea.
Oh.
He was not a big fan of having the family around. He thought that having these long-haired hippies actually drove customers away and wasn't helping anything. Besides that, Squeaky overheard him telling George that, George, hey, you're not a spring chicken, and you really should consider selling your land to developers who will do something with it. And, of course, this would be bad for the family.
Yeah.
So Squeaky's telling Charlie, and Charlie's like, all right, we got to keep an eye on this Donald Shorty Shea.
Oh, boy.
Now, then there was also an eager teenager named Steve Grogan. Steve Grogan was not known for being very bright.
Oh, dear.
But he was known for being a kind of a wild and crazy kid. And he took a shining to the Manson family. And he wanted to join the family, in fact. And Charlie liked that basically here was this eager puppy that was willing to do whatever he said and didn't care how dumb he was.
Oh, yeah.
He was like, fine. But the family members thought that he was literally mentally retarded,
Oh, wow.
as they would say in those days,
Sure.
developmentally disabled, as we would say in these days.
Uh-huh.
And that because of that, and they could never really be sure if he actually was this way or if he was just playing it.
Oh.
But due to that and his like redneck ways, they nicknamed him Clem
Yeah.
as like a dumb hillbilly name.
Sure.
So he became Clem. Sometimes they'd also call him Scramblehead.
Scramblehead. Clem's better.
Now, the family, like I said, they agreed to do ranch work, and that's how they live their life. I'm going to get into the daily routine on the ranch in just a second. But when they move to the ranch, Charlie starts making some new rules.
Oh.
And one of the new rules is that even when they're out like panhandling and stuff like that, women in the family are never allowed to carry money. Not even change.
Whoa.
Now, you might wonder why that is.
I mean, you can't leave if you don't have money.
That's exactly right.
Well, there you go. Cult
Now,
101.
This is both a cult and a pimp trick.
Yes, that's right.
That Charlie knows
All
both
of his
things.
pimp training. Yeah, exactly.
So he's saying, you don't let the ladies have money. You know
Sure.
what? They don't hold on to money.
No, you'll buy
We
them
hold on
anything
to
they
money.
need, but
Right. And it is also during this time that Gypsy and Leslie, who'd been hanging out with Bobby, finally now joined the family full time.
oh wow, okay.
At the beginning, it was very welcoming. It was other young people, and they were kind. We would do embroidery together. The message was, get rid of your inhibition, and then at night, we would all gather and smoke marijuana. If there was LSD, we would take it, and then Manson would talk to us about letting go of our parents, turning on the institutions of life, It was all about shedding our own identity. We all shared clothes.
So, let me tell you about life on the ranch. This was a typical day. They'd get up early around 7 a.m. They would feed the horses. They'd have a quick breakfast that, of course, the ladies would have to scramble to put together. And it was whatever they happened to have on hand. Then they had to go back and saddle the horses and get them ready for customers. Then some people would act as trail guides, taking customers out on the trails and around the ranch. And others would go and do work like cleaning the stalls and, making sure there was fresh hay and all. Then they would go see the ranch hand, Juan Flynn, and he would assign them the work that they need to do, whether it was like fix up a fence or, hitch a post or whatever needed to be done.
Sure, general maintenance.
Yeah. On the random days when Juan Flynn didn't have any work for the family to do, Charlie would just make up chores. Okay. And it seemed to some that he was literally having them like dig holes and then having somebody else come over and fill it just to give them busy work. And the family didn't really understand. But if anybody got out of line, Clem or little Paul Watkins or Charlie himself or even Tex would step in and be like, hey, do what you're told.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the real reason you keep people busy is that in a cult, you want to keep people busy so that they're physically exhausted by the end of the day.
Exactly so. Yep. Same Scientology trick.
There was no lunch.
Oh, wow.
But during this time of the day, the girls would usually be sent on a food run. Now, a food run doesn't mean, of course, that they're going to go to a restaurant and get 5-star dinner.
Sure.
It means they're going to go to a garbage dump behind a grocery store
Yeah.
and get what they can. Sometimes they would offer, the 17-year-old store clerk blowjobs so that he could turn the other way, while the rest of the family was taking what they needed from the garbage, or even slip them things that weren't in the garbage yet. And, so it's a barter system, I suppose.
Yeah, dumpster diving hippies. I went to school with all of them.
The family, specifically, there were specific reports that, they would take whatever they could get. And one night, all they could get was a case full of Cool Whip. So their dinner that night, everybody got their own canister of Cool Whip that they had to eat with their hands.
Whew. Sounds fun.
Yeah.
Yikes.
At the end of the night, Charlie would preach and sing, playing his guitar. And then sometimes there would be the sex sessions. Now again, how deep and involved these got depended. In fact, there were some women on the ranch who refused to take part.
Oh,
and
wow.
you would think that this wouldn't be allowed.
Right.
But these were the women who Charlie would allow to stay because they had something else to offer.
Okay, fair.
But it is true that not everybody was like a sex maniac that was in the Manson family. Tex Watson had this to say about sex in the family.
There was a room in the back of the ranch house totally lined with mattresses. And those members of the family who were free, who felt at one together, usually slept there in whatever combinations worked out on a particular night. Since there were a lot more girls than men, the alternatives were obvious. I eventually got used to making love to one or more of the women, while a few feet away, one of the other men would be involved with some of the others. Perhaps once a month, the whole inner circle would make love together. But even then, there were never more than 8 or 12 of us, since a lot of the girls never became free enough to participate. Charlie did occasionally stage an orgy for the benefit of selected men he hoped to lure into the family. Such events were rare, and more often than not, they backfired. Instead of being drawn in by the sexual circus, the visitors were often driven away, all too aware that it was Charlie who decided the cast and the action.
So this is the time where Tex is officially allowed into the family. Dean Moorehouse is officially kicked out and said, hey, see ya, you're out of here now. Tex, you can stay. You know why? Because he is a good mechanic.
Ew.
And Charlie's got a lot of cars and motorcycles that need work done.
Okay.
So he says, you can stay, Tex, and I'll tell you what, you can have Mary Bruner.
Whoa. The OG.
Yeah. The OG, but also by many reports, the most homely
Sure.
of the girls.
Yeah, but still, bottom bitch. Come on.
Yeah. So Tex is like, okay, but he even says, like, yes, I was given Mary, but basically, like, most of the girls were willing to do whatever anybody wanted.
Right, sure.
So it wasn't that big a deal, but I knew at least that Charlie was, like, warming up to me when he gave me Mary.
Well,
so he considered this, like, a big
that's
honor.
sweet.
Yeah. Another big rule that Charlie had, because now people were having babies or coming in with children.
Yeah.
Big rule, parents and babies are separated. They are not to be raised by their own parents. They're raised by the group. But even then, the actual parents should have, like, minimal contact with them.
Wow. This is like a lot of Scientology stuff.
And Charlie was always dropping little nuggets of wisdom, such as,
no sense makes sense. Thinking is stinking.
and he was always preaching that you needed to become your own person. Now, of course, whether he actually meant you needed to become your own person or the person that he wanted to mold you into, that's up for debate. But Squeaky remembers his teachings this way.
He can get right up to you and affect you in a way that maybe you've never been affected before. Because he can scare the shit out of you, turn around, walk away, and turn back and be somebody else. And he can show you a way to become connected with birds and animals and trees and things like that. He shows you by his actions. He doesn't tell you. He doesn't preach it. He wasn't a preacher. He didn't teach us these things. He just lived them. And that was more than we had seen from anyone else.
And of course, if you pointed out any flaws in Charlie's philosophies and preachings, that was really you pointing out flaws in yourself.
Of course
This
it
is
was.
something we talked about with the cults, of course.
Yeah.
But the idea is, if you had the answers, you wouldn't be here. So the very fact that you're here shows that there's something wrong with you.
Right.
So if you're questioning us, then that means you haven't learned what you're supposed to learn.
Right.
It's not that there's something wrong with us. There's something wrong with
You just aren't perceiving.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if you knew, you wouldn't be here.
Well, yeah, exactly.
So if you're here, then shut the fuck
Then
up
shut up.
and learn the lessons.
Exactly so. Brilliant.
Now, Wilson, Jacobson, and Melcher are still in the picture, believe it or not.
How?
Because, they still kind of like Charlie
find
and
him
some of the
amusing,
guys.
Sure.
And they like the ladies,
Yeah, that's true.
and they
Yeah.
got to get away from the wives.
Sure. Yep.
Ruth Ann is still there,
Yep.
so they want to go visit her. Now, this is also where we introduce the bikers.
Okay.
Like I said, Charlie liked having bikers around because he wanted, like, tough guys. He wanted, like, basically an army to support the family, right? So they were going to be, like, the military division of the family. And he wanted to hook up with the Hells Angels.
Oh,
But
wow.
the Hells Angels, they basically, like, kind of thought Charlie was, like, this, like...
Let's
but, like...
just say a fancy hippie. How about that?
Yeah, they just thought he was nothing. Like, this is
No.
like, he's not like a tough guy. He's
No.
not like, he's just
Not
like,
a proper guru. He's
he's
just
well,
some guy.
fuck gurus. They're bikers.
Yeah,
they don't give a shit about
exactly.
spiritual enlightenment and all this
Right.
shit.
They got their own thing going. Plus, what are they going to take orders from him? I don't
Yeah.
think so.
But he was able to get the interest of a group called the Straight Satans.
Oh.
The Straight Satans were more like what you might call like weekend warriors.
Okay.
They were bikers. They were an outlaw biker gang. They were into drug deals and that kind of thing, and they weren't afraid to get violent.
All right.
But it's not like they were the Hells Angels where these were outlaws for life and this was what they did and they ran a gang and,
Yeah.
they had regular day jobs for the most part.
Okay.
But they still weren't like straight society people,
Clearly.
I don't mean to give
From
that
their
impression.
very provocative name.
Yeah. Now, during this time, police are getting reports that there's a hippie commune where people are doing drugs and stuff out at Spahn Ranch, but they're not overly concerned about this. It's the 60s. There's a lot of this going around.
Yeah.
They're like, they're probably breaking drug rules, but so are a lot of people. If things seem to get out of hand, we'll keep an eye on it. But they did take a little bit of interest because they heard there was an awful lot of vehicles coming in and out of Spahn Ranch. So
Okay.
they're like, well, if it's like a vehicle ring, we might have to look into that later.
Yeah.
But at this point, they weren't too concerned. Also, because Spahn Ranch actually fell between L.A. County and Ventura County. So it was a little bit unclear as to whose jurisdiction Spahn Ranch fell into. And honestly, neither county was really interested in getting involved with this hippie cult clan.
No, this makes sense.
And it was like, what? There's
Like,
drugs
they're
and sex
keeping
happening? Like,
themselves-
whatever.
Yeah.
But Charlie was not truly happy at Spahn Ranch. He felt that the family girls were too able to go off to LA and explore other things and have a good time on their own. He wanted more isolation for them. And there was a family member who kept talking about how her grandmother had a ranch in Death Valley.
Oh, Lord.
Now, Death Valley is a desert.
Yeah. It's
And-
the desert.
The hottest place on Earth, I believe.
At some point or another.
Yeah, at certain times a year or whatever. And it's called Death Valley for a reason.
Yeah.
But Charlie went to this place. It was a place called Barker Ranch, and he loved it. It was isolated. There was not other people for miles. The only other people out there were some strange, like, outsiders, kind of like people that
Perfect.
might even be talked into joining the family.
Right.
Or like prospectors who came out looking for gold every once in a while. The downside was that the nearest city was actually Las Vegas.
Oh, wow.
So, that was kind of a problem, but he was like, it's still really far away. So I
Okay.
think this will be great. The family members themselves, Charlie took them out there to live. They didn't care for it. It was miles from anywhere, super hot. Unlike Spahn Ranch, there were no shades and like caves to hang out with. There were deadly snakes and scorpions hiding under rocks. There was no radio reception. They only had a wood stove, so that became another chore that they had to take care of because every day they have to go and get wood so they could cook. But the biggest problem of all was that there was no food. It's not like when they were at Spahn Ranch and they could just go into the town.
Yeah, where are you going to dive a dumpster if there's no dumpsters?
Exactly. So this became a big problem. He would send the girls to Las Vegas, but he became uncomfortable about that too, because he's like, the whole point of having them here is to isolate them, and now they're going to Las Vegas. And this isn't like Disney Las Vegas like you have now.
Right.
This was like Vegas,
Yeah,
Vegas.
60s Vegas.
Yeah.
Whew.
So shit was getting real in Las Vegas.
Oh my.
So the family wanted to move back to Spahn Ranch, and at this point, Charlie was kind of ready to admit defeat in his own mind and say, like, you know what? Spahn Ranch really was better for us.
Yeah.
But he couldn't come out and say that to the family.
God,
he
no.
couldn't admit that he had made a mistake. So he was looking for an excuse to move back. And lucky him,
Oh dear.
someone showed up and provided just such an excuse. Dennis Wilson's back.
Oh my. Just didn't quite learn his lesson the first time, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, honey.
This is getting near December. And he says, hey, Charlie, guess what? Good news. Beach Boys recorded your song. It's going on our 2020 album. And it's going to be the B-side of, I forget if it's the second or third single from the album.
Oh, wow.
So there's every chance in the world that this is going to be
This
a
is it.
big hit song for you. And, you know, this is going to be good for you. You got to come back to LA and celebrate with everybody. And Charlie says, well, if I must, I must.
My arm.
So he brings most of the family back, although he assigns some family members to stay out there. That includes little Paul Watkins and another guy named Brooks.
Okay.
And so they stay out there. We're going to hear more from them later on.
Huh.
Now, when they move back, they expect to be greeted with open arms by George Spahn, but George Spahn actually says, no, you guys can't move here. And he's surprised by this. He lets Squeaky move back in, but the rest of the family's not welcome.
Oh.
So the rest of the family finds other places to live for a little bit. Don't worry, they will eventually get back to Spahn Ranch.
Good.
During this time, the Beatles' White Album is released. Now, there's a lot to be said about this. So much so, in fact, I've already done an episode about it.
Well, there you go.
Longtime listeners will have heard it, possibly even twice, because I just re-released it.
Yep.
If you have not heard it, I suggest you go back. It's only 2 weeks ago that I reposted the episode.
Mm-hmm.
It's called The Beatles and Charlie Manson.
Yep.
So go ahead and listen to that episode. It will explain everything that Manson thought about the White Album, but I will give you the bare bones details here. He listens to this album and he thinks that he hears messages hidden in the lyrics of these songs. And he thinks that the Beatles are telling him, hey, Charlie, you are basically Jesus, and together we're the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and you are the one who has the key to the underground city.
It's so weird. I thought the same thing when I heard that album for the first time.
Yeah. And he thinks that the song Blackbird is about black men
Oh, yeah.
rising to their feet and taking their rightful place in the world as leaders, however briefly it may be, because, of course, he doesn't think they'll be able to last.
Yeah.
There's a song on there called Sexy Sadie, which the family is like, they're fucking talking about Sadie. Like, we have a woman in the family named Sadie, and she is sexy, and she's
What
always
are the
talking about sex.
chances?
Yeah. There's a song called Honey Pie where the Beatles, you know, say, hey, you know, we'd like to meet, but we're lazy. So Charlie interprets this as them saying, like, oh, they want me to come to England, but no, we need them to come here. In fact, he even sends the girls, like, out to send messages to the Beatles,
Oh, dear.
you know, Western Union or whatever, and tried to get a hold of them. Turns out it doesn't work out.
Phew. Close one.
But anyway, so he hears all these messages, but perhaps two of the most important ones are Revolution number 9, because Charlie says this is the audio file of Revelation, the book of Revelation in the Bible, which Charlie was really into.
Sure.
And he says this is the soundtrack to the end of the world, the coming race war, otherwise known as Helter Skelter.
Right.
And this race war is going to be when the blacks murder the white people, rise up and take control.
Okay.
But the black man, when he does finally come into power, he's never been in power in the entire history of the world. He's not going to know how to handle anything. He's going to need a white leader to come forth. And that is when Charlie and the Manson family will emerge from a cave that they will have escaped to live underground in a magical city. They will escape from this cave, and they will pat the black man on the head and say, don't worry, we got this. You go back to picking our cotton, and we will rule the world for you and tell you how to live.
How's my face looking right now?
I mean, that seems about right.
Yeah, I didn't know any of this. This is remarkable.
This is the theory that he's come up with. Now, I will say, playing devil's advocate, this is also the theory that the DA uses at the trial.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, spoiler alert, Charlie ends up going to jail.
Yeah, big surprise.
How true it is that Manson actually believed in any of this is debatable. How true it is that he actually said that this is what these songs were about, or this is the theory that he had, is debatable.
Okay.
How true the underground city and all that stuff is, it's all up for debate. Again, a bunch of unreliable witnesses.
Right, fair.
But we've heard it from enough family members that I tend to think that at the very least he said it. Whether or not he believed it,
right,
I don't know. But I feel like he probably
He
did
must have
at the very
preached
least
it,
said it.
Yeah. I mean, if he's preaching to them every night, it seems like it would sink in.
Now, this is when things start to take a turn. Not everything had been rosy up to this point, but he wasn't talking about the end of the world and death and like all that stuff like all the time. He might have mentioned it here and there, but it wasn't now he's talking about it all the time. But world events are shaping up to kind of be in line with what Charlie's talking about.
Well,
there
sure.
are race riots happening.
Yeah.
There is the war in Vietnam. There are student protests happening. There are all these things going on that make it seem like, hey, you know what? Maybe Charlie's onto something.
Maybe it's end times. Yeah.
Maybe not with the exact Helter Skelter theory, but that the world is changing in some way. And maybe he does know something.
All right.
So I'm not saying it's not crazy.
Right,
but
sure.
I'm just saying, if you're already kind of on the crazy train, it's not a huge leap to go a little bit further.
There are things to point to,
Yeah. Now, during this time, like I said, things are getting darker, and this is when he tells them that, look, if anybody tries to leave the family from here on out, they're going to get killed. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to kill them, but they're going to be killed in Helter Skelter.
Okay.
And actually, the best thing that we could do for them, the most kind thing that we could do for them, is kill them.
Is to kill them, so they don't have to live through it.
You have to really love someone
right
in order to kill them.
Uh-huh.
And if you're willing to kill, you should be willing to be killed. And if you're willing to be killed, you should be willing to kill.
Those are words that he has put together.
So this is when he becomes obsessed, according to some accounts, with the White Album and the Book of Revelation. And he starts preaching about both. Again, did a whole episode about it. Both of those things.
Yeah.
Go back and listen to that episode. We'll wait for you.
Cool.
Welcome back.
Hey.
Okay.
Here we are.
Cease to Exist is released just about a month later after the White Album comes out on that single version. The full album won't be released till the end of January, but the single comes out. But guess what? Like I said, not called Cease to Exist anymore. It's called Never Learn Not to Love, but it actually does appear as a single and on this album by the Beach Boys.
Wow.
Charlie hears this, and turns out he's not super down with it.
What? That seems really unlikely.
Yeah, so that becomes a bit of a sticking point between the two of them. However, you might think Charlie's going to do something crazy at this point.
Yeah.
But he still needs Wilson, because Wilson is his best connection to Terry Melcher.
Right.
Terry Melcher still hasn't listened to Manson's music, still hasn't auditioned Manson, still hasn't recorded Manson.
Yeah.
So Manson needs to act nice, even though he's saying, like, this is a betrayer. And he's telling the family, this is a betrayer. But we still got to act nice to him because we still need him to get to Melcher.
That's still very coherent of him at this point.
Yeah. Around the same time, by the way, Melcher moves out of Cielo Drive.
Oh, yeah. Important point.
Because his mom is sick, and it turns out that his mom's manager is taking advantage of her and been, like, embezzling money from her. And so he comes down to take care of mom's career and make sure that she doesn't end up losing more of her fortune.
Yeah.
And he actually does turn her career around, so happy story there.
Hooray.
But him and Candy Bergen move out of Cielo Drive at this point.
Right.
On February 15th, Roman Polanski, film director, and his wife, actress and model Sharon Tate, move into Melcher's former home on Cielo Drive. Now, around the time that the White Album came out, Tex Watson actually noticed that what Charlie was saying got cuckoo crazy.
Oh.
And he said, you know what? I'm good.
Wow.
I fought for a long time to get admitted into the family, and now I have, And now what you're saying is crazy nuts.
Cuckoo bananas, yep.
I'm getting out of here.
Wow.
So he does. But sometime around February or March, he comes back.
Yeah.
Why? Because he says he really liked the discipline that family life gave him.
Oh.
He was still like a druggy kid, and he needed this discipline.
When I was drawn back to the family at the end of February, all they could talk about was Helter Skelter coming down fast. To them, I was ignorant and blind and had a lot of catching up to do. I didn't know what they were talking about. My head was spinning from all this new insight. This ideology seemed feasible since everyone believed it. We felt emotionally disconnected with no place in society. As my values changed, I committed my life to the family. The vocabulary seemed to be centered around a very dark reality. Dying, death, and destruction.
Yikes.
So the family is back at Spahn Ranch now, back to the chores, back to their normal life there. But Charlie has added classes on survival skills and survival drills.
Ooh.
So he's teaching them how to use knives. He's teaching them how to use guns. He's teaching them how to walk in sand without leaving noticeable footprints. And he also begins to do what they call creepy crawls.
What is a creepy crawl?
Creepy crawl is when the family would sneak into somebody's house late at night and rearrange the furniture.
What?
Yeah. Just so they could prove that they could do it with the family in the house, sleeping, and not be caught.
Oh my god.
And then it would like blow the minds of, pig society that someone had been in their house and moved things around and yet not stolen anything.
All right, see, I think you might know where my hide key is, and I swear to God, if you come in and do that, I'm going to know it's you.
So yes, he's making them do all these things. And of course, he keeps talking about killing. He says, look, I'm teaching you these things for defense, but you need to be willing to kill as well. Because if someone's coming after you or your brother in the family, you got to be willing to kill.
Yeah, all right.
Family first, right? Now, around this time, he starts wanting to collect dune buggies. He wants to either buy dune buggies, steal dune buggies, convert cars into dune buggies, because this Barker Ranch is in a really remote area, and even with four-wheel drive, it's very difficult to get to.
Okay.
So he wants vehicles that are going to be able to handle the desert, no problem. So dune buggies.
So he's still thinking that they're going to go back to this ranch at some point, the other one?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because they're looking for this magical
the
hole.
cave with the... Yeah,
Right.
okay, sure.
Now, they need money to get these dune buggies. They're not afraid to steal them, but they know that they're not going to be able to do that forever, and so they want money not only for dune buggies, but also for other supplies that they need for the end of the world and Helter Skelter and all that. So he tries to do a bunch of things. Of course, they're selling drugs, which the family has already dabbled in, and with the help of the straight Satans, they get more into. He also tries to get the girls jobs as topless dancers. But, as we've stated before, Charlie's girls weren't considered the most attractive, and also they didn't have, working showers on the ranch. They just had a hose and outhouses, so nobody was particularly clean, except for maybe Squeaky, because she got to live in the main house. And also, the girls were kind of flat, with the exception of Susan.
Yeah, and hippies and not... Yeah.
So he didn't have any luck there.
That's a shame.
But they did decide to open a nightclub at Spahn Ranch in the saloon building.
Okay, well, hey, there's a saloon.
And according to some reports, this nightclub was named Helter Skelter.
Ooh.
And they would have people come. And local teenagers loved it because nobody was checking their ID.
Check IDs.
But this did draw the attention of the police.
You think?
And it actually didn't turn out that bad for them. They didn't arrest anybody or anything.
Oh, wow.
But they did put a stop to the nightclub and fined George Spahn for owning the property.
Ooh.
And I think it was close to $2,000 or something like that. So he was not pleased.
I imagine.
And also, remember, he never actually gave the family permission to move back. They just decided they were going
came back. Yeah. Well, what's he going to do?
It's around this time that one of the straight Satans starts hanging out more often. This is the group's treasurer, a guy by the name of Danny DiCarlo. He also takes a shine to members of the Manson family, certain ladies in particular. Guess who? Ruth Ann.
Seriously?
He also likes Leslie too, though.
Ruth Ann.
The girls actually like the bikers in general, but Danny DiCarlo in particular, and they nickname him Donkey Dan.
Oh, dear. I wonder why.
Yes, you're exactly right.
All right, then.
Now, at this time, Squeaky, again acting like Charlie's little spy in the main house, hears ranch hand Shorty Shea once again in the ear of George Spahn, and he's telling George, he's like, George, you know, these hippies, they're driving away customers, and now they've got these bikers coming in here. They're up to no good. We got to get them off the property, man. I will help you. Just give me the word, and I can get some guys down here, and we can get them off the land.
Astute. Very nice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Squeaky reports this to Manson, and
Yeah.
Manson's like, okay, Shorty is on my list.
That's not a list you want to be on.
No. Now, Jacobson comes back for another visit because he doesn't care about the music, but he really wants to make this movie that he's thinking of.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And he's trying to tell Charlie about it, but Charlie doesn't seem to get the difference between like a regular movie and a documentary.
Okay.
And, you know, Jacobson's trying to explain this to him, and Charlie says, come with me. And he takes him out to the back of the ranch, and he shows them they're building like apartment buildings across yonder, and you can see them building. And Charlie says, what do you think all that is? And he says, well, they're, you know, going to be houses and apartment buildings. And Charlie says, no, man, those are coffins. And Jacobson is like, he's not impressed, and he's just kind of had enough of Manson's bullshit, and he's like, Charlie, you're full of shit.
Yeah.
Manson pulls a gun.
What a surprise.
And he says, well, what would you do if I shot you? And, you know, Jacobson's not going to give Charlie the pleasure of seeing him scared, even though he was. Because he thought, you know, this guy's crazy.
Obviously.
But he says, well, I guess I would die. And then Manson just goes back to having a regular conversation like nothing happened.
Okay.
And Jacobson's like, you know what? Maybe I don't care about this movie as much anymore.
Yeah.
You know, this
see
could
you
be
later.
it now.
Holy moly.
Around this time, little Paul comes back from Barker Ranch. Remember, he had been, you know, back there with Brooks.
Right.
To keep an eye on things. And he reports that while they were there at Barker Ranch, this guy came around by the name of Paul Crockett, a guy maybe a little bit older than Charlie. But he, the guys there started telling Paul Crockett about Charlie and about how great he was and all these philosophies and ideas that he had. And Paul Crockett was like, you guys know all that is bullshit, right?
Uh-oh.
And Charlie's like, well, fuck that guy.
Well, yeah.
But Paul's like, yeah, but I don't know, because it seems like Brooks is kind of like believing him and stuff.
Oh, no.
Charlie, now he has been known to get violent.
Right.
With some of the ladies.
Yes.
But he's never put his hands on the men.
Oh.
But little Paul, at this point, he starts to strangle little Paul.
Whoa.
And it's not just like a little bit.
Yeah.
Paul thinks he's going to die.
Uh-huh.
And he decides, instead of fighting anymore, to just let go and give up his life. And as soon as he does that, Charlie stops strangling him. A little telling about his psyche.
Interesting.
This tends to be the case.
Yeah.
If you seem willing, then Charlie stops.
Yeah. Ugh.
But kind of leaves a bad taste in Paul's mouth.
Yeah.
He'd been one of his most devoted followers up to this point, and now he's like, man, fuck this.
Yeah.
So when he goes back, he's like, I'm going to talk to Paul a little bit more, see what he has to say, because Paul Crockett had also studied Scientology.
Okay, interesting. Huh.
So he knew all the philosophies and everything that Manson had ripped off from there. Because, I think that was a big part of Manson's appeal. He had all these philosophies and other ways of looking at the world that these children hadn't had the life experience to live yet. They'd only known whatever their parents had told him and told them and what they grew up in their small town. You know, the world was the 10 blocks they grew up on.
Yeah.
Now, in mid-March, Melcher is, he's kind of got his mom's stuff under control. And he's been out of touch with Manson and everything and all these people. But he's like, all right, look, finally, people have been bugging me about coming to see Manson. I'm going to go see him. He sets an appointment to come to visit him at the ranch.
Wow.
Because he knows that all the troubles that Charlie's had in recording studios. So he says, you know what? I'll come to you. I'll bring a little, bit of recording studio to the ranch. And we can record you there and I'll hear you there and all that.
My God, people fall over themselves to give him chances.
Right, and Charlie gets really excited about this.
I imagine so.
In fact, he tells the girls and the gentlemen then, look, we've got to spruce this place up, and we've got to, make sure everything looks nice. You girls work on your harmonies. Also, make me a new suit. But not just any suit. He wants a buckskin suit.
Ooh.
So they, at great expense, go and buy this deer skin.
Wow.
But they don't even realize, like, you can't just, like, make it out of deer skin, like, just like that. Like, you have to stretch it, and you have to oil it, and all this stuff.
It's a whole thing.
Right. So they have to go through this whole ordeal. But they end up making it. So Charlie's there in his best suit on the day. The girls are all there. Everybody's lined up and waiting. And everyone's like, it's not like Charlie to get excited about something. Like, he seems like a little bit, like, nervous. Like,
Yeah.
But he really was. And guess what? Melcher doesn't show.
Oh.
So a couple days later, Charlie's pissed.
Yeah.
And he's like, I was made a fool in front of the entire family. This will not stand.
Oh my God.
So he decides he's going to go to Melcher's house, which he's been to before.
Yeah.
He drove him home.
Yeah.
He's going to go to his house. He didn't drive him home, but he was in the car when he was driving.
Yeah.
He's going to go to Melcher's house, pull him out by the ear if he has to, and bring him down to the ranch. This is on March 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
Manson shows up at Cielo Drive. Now, of course, we know already.
Right.
Terry Melcher doesn't live there anymore.
Correct.
It's now Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski.
Yeah.
But they always had friends around. So on this day, Jay Sebring, who is the ex-boyfriend of Sharon Tate and also a celebrity hairdresser, so famous, in fact, as a hairdresser, and a men's styling guru,
Yeah.
that he appeared on an episode of the Batman television show
Oh my gosh.
as Mr. Oceanbring. On a play on his name.
Yeah.
And there was one of the famous Batman fights
Oh my gosh.
in one of his, salons. Or
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
so you can look for that online. It's
Yeah,
there.
definitely
You
will.
can see him. We'll get more into the story of certain people later on.
Sure.
But Jay Sebring is there. Sharon Tate is there. Polanski, I believe, is there, although he might be in Europe at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And a photographer friend of Sharon's is there as well. The photographer looks out the front window and sees this like dirty-looking little hippie guy walking around the front yard. He opens the door, and this guy's just walking around like he owns the place.
Yeah.
And this is supposed to be like a private celebrity residence.
Right.
So he's like, hey, buddy, can I help you? And Manson comes up to the front porch, and he's like, oh, yeah, I'm here. I'm looking for Terry Melcher.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, well, the Melchers moved out a long time ago. This is the Polanski residence now.
Yeah.
And Charlie's like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. And at this point, Sharon comes over to the door, and she's all, well, who is it? And he's like, oh, it's nobody, somebody. He's just looking for Terry Melcher. I don't know, maybe you can go check the guest house and see if they know anything. So Charlie's like, all right, sorry to bother you. He goes down, he checks the guest house, which is where the owner of the property is living,
Right.
Rudy Antibali. And Rudy's like, I know who you are, Charlie. Terry's not here. He hasn't lived here for some time. I don't like you bothering the people that do live here. You're not welcome here. Get out.
Get out. Yeah.
So Charlie finally leaves. When he does, Sharon turns to her photographer friend and says,
Who was that creepy little guy?
so they did actually meet.
Wow.
Well, not meet, but
Yeah, but they
laid eyes on each other
did.
before
Oh, that's so spooky.
everything went down.
That's some spooky ass shit right there.
So around this time, the rhetoric that Charles Manson is using at Spahn Ranch intensifies. It's more about death. It's more about blood. It's about the coming revolution. You need to be ready. You need to kill. You need to be ready to be killed. This is part of the revolution. This is going to be messy, but it's going to be the war to end all wars. Now, we're not going to be involved in the revolution. We're trying to avoid it. But if we need to defend ourselves, we will.
Yeah.
But the point for us is to get to the desert, get to our hole in the ground, live in our magical city
Yes.
till we can come back
So
and
you'll
rule
be
the
ready
world.
to go. Yeah.
And he says, by the way, don't ever mention any of this to anybody on the outside. Don't mention Helter Skelter. Don't mention the end of the world, because people don't understand. They don't have the enlightenment that we do. They're going to think you're crazy. They're going to lock you up, and they're going to zap your brains.
Well, maybe.
So the family members are like, oh, yeah, we don't want our brains
Want
zapped.
your
I guess
brains
that's,
zapped.
guess that's right. Now, sometime around here, Melcher sends word that, like, hey, sorry I didn't make it the first time. I'm going to come back in May.
Oh, okay, and me.
And this time, he really does show.
Oh, wow.
And he brings Greg Jacobson, who still is semi-interested in making this movie.
Jeez.
So this time, Melcher shows up, and he listens to Charlie sing. Mm-hmm. But when he leaves, he's really kind of non-committal. He's Charlie assumed he'd be offered a record contract right then and there. But he's really non-committal. He gives Charlie $50 for his troubles.
All right.
And Charlie spins this because all the family members like, hey, what'd he say? When are we moving? When are we,
Right.
And he's like, well, he gave me this money as a signing bonus.
Okay.
And he's going to come back and he's going to talk to us and he's probably going to sign us then. Amazingly enough, on June 6th, Melcher does come back.
Wow.
This time he's accompanied by Jacobson and another guy named Deasy. Now the family, in a very, very misguided moment here,
oh dear,
decide to slip Deasy an LSD tab.
For God's sake.
They think that this will open him up to Manson's music,
of course,
and he'll experience it the way they experience it, because they're usually around a campfire on LSD while Charlie's playing, and it blows their mind.
I'm sure it's amazing then. Yeah.
Problem is, Charlie starts to play and everything. Deasy starts to freak out.
Yeah, as you would.
He has a bad trip.
Oh my God.
So bad, in fact, that Melcher and Jacobson have to take him home.
Oh my God.
So they have to cancel the night.
Wow.
Melcher calls a couple days later and he says, look, Charlie, you're good, but I just don't know what I'd do with you.
It's fair.
And that's the end of it.
Ooh.
That's the official, final brush off. Now, Manson spins this too. He tells his family members, this isn't him not being good enough. This is Melcher as a corporate motherfucking pig.
Absolutely.
Refusing to allow Manson's music to get out, which he knows will heal the world.
Yes.
Make it a better place.
Yeah, absolutely.
For you and for me and the entire human race.
Everybody. Yep.
Speaking of creepy musicians. During this time, Manson becomes even more violent. And Leslie notes that he seems angry all the time now. And I have a few quotes from family members talking about Manson's violence, which I'll play for you right now.
He wasn't that violent toward me, but he was towards others. I watched him beat people up. Mary Bruner got beat up a lot. She was older and the mother of his child, and she questioned him. She always had a black eye a bruising, but she stayed.
Diane Lake. We used to call her Snake. She was one of the saddest members of the family. So young, only 13 when she joined. Charlie used to hit her and pull her hair a lot. Once he whipped her with an electric cord, but she still stayed around and loved him.
Now, the family had been doing creepy crawls, but they made it a point of pride that they never stole anything during these creepy crawls. But at this point, they began stealing things.
Yeah.
And based on statements that she makes later on, it's possible that they even break into the house of one of their future victims and steal items from this residence.
Whoa.
It may have had nothing to do with the Manson family, but there were break-ins at this one particular house. And this victim later on states that she believes people have been breaking into the house during the course of this same summer.
Whoa.
Now this, again, Manson is preaching about murder and death, and he's constantly asking people, would you die for me?
Woof.
At this point.
That's
and they will say yes. And he says, if you're willing to die for me, you should be willing to
kill for me.
See,
there
you're
we
catching
go.
on.
I'm getting it now.
Now you're thinking like a Manson girl.
That's right. You always knew I had it in me, didn't you?
Now, during this time, Leslie Van Houten, relatively new family member, the one who used to be Bobby's girl.
Oh, yeah.
Now, she's like, maybe this isn't so great here.
I had told him at one point that I wanted to go, that I was exhausted, and he said he took me on this dune buggy ride and told me to jump off because to leave him was to die. And I had been around him enough that I believed it.
At this time, Charlie gets a report that little Paul Watkins is no longer at Barker Ranch.
Interesting.
He, like his buddy Brooks, has taken off with Paul Crockett, the Scientologist.
Yeah.
It's the one time Scientology actually saved the day, I think.
Yeah, a bit. Well, God knows what happened to them after that, I guess.
Well, he wasn't like a Scientologist anymore.
He had studied Scientology. Oh, sure. I'm sure he read the books and whatever. It wasn't quite the behemoth that it became.
Now, Charlie needs money, right?
Sure.
So he decides what he's going to do is he's going to set up intentionally set up a drug burn.
Oh, what now?
A drug burn, you know.
Obviously.
Okay, what it
So-
is when you set up a drug deal
Yeah.
and then you don't deliver on the actual drugs, but you keep the money.
Okay, and this works how now?
Well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
What he wants to do is he wants to get one of Tex Watson's ex-girlfriend, because Tex had left the family, remember?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And when he did, he was living with this girl who happened to be a drug dealer.
Okay.
And he came back and he told Charlie, you know, what had happened. Charlie forgave Tex, which might seem unusual, but remember, he needed him to fix those dune buggies.
Yeah, he's
He
useful.
needed his mechanical skills.
Yeah.
So he said, you know what, Tex? Another way you're going to make up what you did to the family? We're going to tell your girl that we want to sell drugs to her.
Okay.
And, of course, we're not going to sell it.
Right.
And when they come looking for you at Spahn Ranch, we'll hide you and tell them that you left weeks ago, and what are they going to do about it? They
Right.
can't fight the whole family.
Yeah.
And Tex, feeling like he has an obligation to Charlie and not really caring about this ex-girlfriend anymore, he's like, yeah, okay. But there's a problem.
Oh.
He sets up this deal. I think it was for like $2,000 worth of drugs
Oh, okay.
with the girl. The problem is the girl doesn't want to buy it herself, but she knows someone who does, and she's going to bring him along to buy these drugs.
Okay.
Okay. So she gets the money in advance, and then they meet up, but of course Tex doesn't bring the drugs. He just goes to collect the money.
Yeah.
Problem is, the man that she brought is a giant black guy named Bernard Crow,
Uh-huh.
also known as Lots of Papa.
Oh, that's who this is.
Yes.
Okay.
So Lots of Papa has already given the money, and he doesn't have the drugs. And Tex is like, well, the thing is, I did have them, but now I got to go back to the ranch. I just got to go and get it. It's no big deal, but they need the money first, so I'm going to go back and get it. Lots of Papa says, all right, but I'll tell you what, I'm holding on to your girl, and here's all these terribly graphic things that I'm going to do to her
Oh, my.
if I don't get that money or my drugs.
There you go.
And he says, oh, yeah, man, no problem. Don't worry about it. I'll be right back. He runs to Spahn Ranch. He says, hey, Charlie, got a little problem here.
Here's the thing.
He's going to murder my girlfriend,
Yep.
my ex-girlfriend,
Well, yeah.
which isn't great.
No.
And I'll probably be found out, and this will be a problem for all of us.
Right.
And Charlie says, well, fuck her. But
Right,
he's like,
obviously he
no,
would
no,
say
no,
that.
no. This
Yeah.
is a problem. The guy said he was a Black Panther, and
Right.
this could be bad. We don't want the Black Panthers, coming down on us. And Charlie's like, all right, well, we don't have the drugs to give him,
Yeah.
and you don't want him to murder your girl. What can we do? We got to kill this guy.
Clearly.
So Charlie goes back with Watson, and he basically just walks up to Lots of Papa, shoots him in the chest.
Damn.
Lots of Papa collapses. Charlie and the girl and Tex split.
Whoa.
But now, Charlie is extra paranoid because he thinks he just killed the
He
Black
thinks he
Panther.
pissed off the Black Panthers. Right.
And now he's worried that the Panthers will come looking for the family.
Oh, boy.
Little secret, Charlie won't find this out till later, but I'll let you know now.
Uh-huh.
Lots of Papa,
Yeah.
not dead.
What?
Also, not a Black
Not
Panther.
a Black Panther. I knew that much. Oh, dear.
Now we have a new character entering our story, and this is Linda Kasabian.
Oh, okay.
Linda Kasabian was another kind of drifter in life. She was from New Hampshire. She was a married woman. She had a baby named Tanya, and she was living with her husband, but things weren't really going that great. They were kind of trying to live a hippie lifestyle and into drugs and, things, not ideal Mother of the Year status.
Yeah.
And she meets this woman, Gypsy,
Ah.
at a party. And Gypsy says, hey, man, if you're sick of living your life with your husband and everything, you can come live with the family. And her husband had been talking about starting a business and like all this stuff that she wasn't interested in, or no, he was gonna, I forget what the story was now.
Yeah.
He was gonna sail somewhere like in South America, and she was
All
like,
right.
I am
He
not
had
in.
some
They had
ideas.
actually like separated and then they got back together, but it wasn't working out.
Yeah, sure.
And so Gypsy's like, you got to come meet Charlie. This is amazing. You'll have a whole new way of life. You can bring the kid.
Yeah.
Everything will be wonderful.
All right.
And she's like, you know what? I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
But Gypsy says, if you come with us, you got to cut loose all the ties to your old life.
There's another one.
And also, you should probably bring something as a gift for the family. So she's like, oh, well, my husband has $5,000 stashed in the trailer.
Well,
And she's like, bring
that'll
that.
do.
So she brings that as a gift for the family to show her like new devotion to Charles Manson and the Manson family.
Wow.
So because she brings it, so Charlie's not really taking new recruits at this time
Yeah.
because he's so paranoid about people coming in and all that.
Sure.
But this woman's coming in with a stack of cash.
Yep.
And she has a valid driver's license. Of all the people in the family, only she and Mary Bruner have a valid driver's license.
Oh, wow. Okay, so she's an asset.
So she is welcome to the family. Manson wants to make more money, and he wants to make it now because he feels, look, there's many ways you can look at this. He's either paranoid that the Black Panthers are after him. He is paranoid that Helter Skelter is going to happen. Or as a cult leader, he's just paranoid that the family is getting restless and there's got to be some kind of action somewhere and they need money.
A little bit of column A.
Could be all those things, right?
Yeah.
So he starts coming up with even more plans. And he says, you know what? Fuck Dennis Wilson. He owes me money. They stole my song. I'm going to find Dennis Wilson. I'm going to get this.
Oh, dear.
But Dennis Wilson has moved around, and he never gave Charlie his new address.
Yeah, go figure.
Charlie does eventually find the address, but Wilson isn't home. And he leaves a little note saying, I'll always be able to find you, and you can find me. He also leaves a bullet.
Oh,
So his messages are getting a little more explicit
that
these
is
days.
clear.
Now, here's where things get really interesting. Bobby Beausoleil is still affiliated with the family,
Yeah,
although not a full-fledged member.
right.
But he's buying drugs from a guy named Gary Hinman, who we touched on in the first episode,
Oh,
the music
okay.
teacher,
Yeah, right.
who sometimes lets family members crash at his house
Right.
and sometimes lets them borrow one of his 2 cars. So Beausoleil wants to buy drugs from Hinman in order to sell them to the Straight Satans.
Okay.
So he does, $1,000 worth. But he brings the drugs to the Straight Satans. Mescaline tablets, by the way.
Oh, wow.
And the Straight Satans say, hey man, this shit's no good.
Uh-oh.
We want our money back. Now, was the shit really not any good? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's what they claim.
Okay.
Bobby thinks it's bullshit. And he's afraid to ruin his whole relationship with Gary Hinman over some bullshit that the Straight Satans are saying.
Right.
So he says, Charlie, what should I do? Charlie says, fuck Hinman.
Yeah.
He's not very useful to us. Go get the money. And while you're at it, get some money for the family.
Okay.
Because for some reason they had heard that he had money. And the amount of money ranges depending on who's telling the story. But that's what he says.
Oh, boy.
In fact, most of the story we're going to hear in the voices of Mary Bruner and Susan Atkins.
We went to Gary's to see if we could get some money from him. Bobby thought he had lots of money. We were going to ask for it, and if we didn't get it, take it by force. I made supper, and we ate, and I was out in the kitchen and cleaning dishes, and then I heard these noises like fighting in the living room, and Bobby had stabbed Gary. Gary said, "Don't do any more," and Bobby asked him to chant. Gary was a Buddhist and had been chanting all week. So Bobby asked him to chant some more, and he did. Sadie and I went out the door, and I think Bobby stabbed Gary again. And then Bobby came out and said, "Okay, let's go." But then Gary started real loud, deep breathing, real raspy, loud. He did it a couple times, and we went back in, and Bobby put a pillow over Gary's head for a while. Then he asked me to hold it there so Gary wouldn't be so loud. Then Bobby and I went into the kitchen, and Sadie held the pillow over Gary's head. I walked back in the room, and she says,
It's all over with.
And there's just a few details that Mary left out, so let me fill in some blanks. I think she left these out mostly because she was trying to protect Manson at the time. This was just like a music teacher guy. He wasn't like a family member. He's not some hardened criminal. Like, he sells some drugs, but he's like this Buddhist music teacher.
Yeah.
Beausoleil calls Manson and he says, "Hey, Charlie, he says he's got no money." And Manson says, "God damn it, I'm coming over."
Uh-oh.
So Manson shows up with a sword that he'd gotten from the Straight Satans. And he says, "Hinman, the money, now." He says, "Charlie, I don't have any money." And he says, "Well, you got some pink slips, don't you, for those cars?" "Listen, man, I'm not giving you my cars." Charlie says, "You're giving us those fucking cars." And he takes his sword and he whacks him in the face with it. And he actually slices his ear like right down the center. And you can see they have like a mannequin, I guess, later on that they show at the trials.
Yeah.
That shows the wounds that he suffered. And you can see there's a big slice down his face.
Ooh. Okay.
Emily literally just quivered.
Yep.
But that, unfortunately, is not the end of it. Manson says, "Look, I got to go, but he's going to give up those pink slips or he's going to give up his life." And same with the money. So they keep torturing him, basically. And at some point, they're stabbing him and everything.
Jeez Louise.
And for I think, the weekend. And Susan Atkins and Mary Bruner are both there. And they're like, "Gary, just give up the money, man." And he's like, "I don't have money."
Wow.
And they just keeps, and so every so often Beausoleil is calling Manson and they're like, and Manson's like, "Get the money, get the cars, figure it out." So he finally gives up the cars and he, gives them the pink slips.
Fuck it, whatever.
And then they're like, "Okay, but we still need the money because this isn't going to be enough." And so he's like, "I don't have this fucking money." They call Manson again and he's like, "Man, we can't, what are we going to do? Like, we've just tortured him for 2 days.
Yeah.
There's no way he's not going to the cops."
Right.
And he probably needs to go to the hospital and we're going to get found out. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Manson says, "Well, I guess you know what you got to do then."
Well, there you go. Kill him with a sword.
Well, he doesn't have the sword, but he does have a knife.
Oh,
that was
knife.
Manson's sword. So
That was Manson's sword.
Yeah.
Pardon me. He left with his sword, of course.
So he stabs him. And Manson's also like, "Hey, by the way, when you do this, write in blood on the walls.
Oh, right.
Write, about political piggies or like whatever, and then like leave like a paw print so that it looks like the Black Panthers committed this crime. Because that way, there's different theories you can go with here.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a mixture of both. Either Manson was thinking this would kick off Helter Skelter because it looks like another racially motivated attack.
Sure.
And that this was the black man rising up against white people and this was going to be the start of the race war.
Yep.
That's one theory. The other theory is make it look like the Black Panthers because then the police will start hassling the Black Panthers and they won't have time to pick on poor Charlie Manson and his family for shooting that one Black Panther who wasn't really a Black
actually
Panther.
Not a Black Panther, yeah.
And also isn't dead.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
So, could be either one of those theories, could be both of those theories.
Right.
But that's what happens to Gary Hinman.
Oof.
Now they leave with his cars. They go back to Spahn Ranch, and it's said that people overhear them, Susan and Bobby in particular, bragging to the bikers that they had done this.
Oh, wow.
Now, Bobby had brought a new girlfriend with him at this time, a woman named Kitty Lutzinger.
Oh.
And Kitty was pregnant with Bobby's baby.
Oh, wow.
And she is not super comfortable with all this news.
Huh.
And she's like, "Bobby, we got to get out of here, man."
Yeah.
And so they decide, you know what? Just in case the heat does come down on the family, let's be separate. So they take off. But they take off in one of Hinman's cars.
Oh, no.
The police are aware that this man has been murdered because he's found several days later by some friends of his that came to do like a welfare check on him.
Good Lord.
And they find him dead on the floor with this writing on the wall, "Political Piggy," and the paw print and blood. And so the police know that he's dead and that his cars are missing. This car is spotted. They note that it looks like a suspicious vehicle. They run the plate, find out it's just, this car involved.
Yeah.
They pull him over and they say, "Hey, why do you know you're driving a dead man's car?
Yeah.
Get out." So he gets out of the car. The police search. They find the murder weapon, the knife, hidden in the wheel well of the car.
Not super smart, y'all.
And they say, "Hey, guess what? You're under arrest."
Wow.
So now, Bobby Beausoleil has been arrested.
Yep.
He's not a full-time family member.
Right.
He may very well start saying, "Hey, look, Charlie Manson told me to do this. He orchestrated this. Yes, I did it, but it was under his orders. You got to talk to the Manson family.
Right.
Charlie wants to make sure that he remains in good standing with Bobby Beausoleil so that this doesn't happen.
Right.
So, we have a bunch of theories coming together now.
Okay.
About why the next series of murders take place, which is going to, of course, be next week's episode, focusing on the infamous Tate and LaBianca murders.
Yeah.
Why do these murders happen? Is it because Charlie wants to start a race war and he wants to make it look like black people are killing rich, wealthy white people so that this race war will start, in his words, showing Blackie how to do it?
Oof.
Or is it because they want to make it look like whoever killed Hinman is still on the loose and killing others in the same manner and writing the same kinds of things on the wall?
Okay.
Or is it all that plus Charlie's still afraid of Black Panthers,
Yep.
wants to get more heat on the Black Panthers and make it look like they have gone crazy over the end of July, the beginning of August, and that they are on a murder spree and they are killing white people and writing these political messages. But all of this leads to the murders, which we will discuss on next week's episode.
Oof.
We got through it.
Yahoo.
And it's not even 2 hours, so I think we're good.
Oh my gosh.
But Emily,
Yeah.
any thoughts you want to add to this before you go?
Oh gosh, so many, but I don't know. I'm just I'm more fascinated to delve more into the cultish aspects of this. Like, you guys have spoken about it a lot, and it's definitely piqued my interest even more. Like, I
To
gotta read
me,
up more.
I think that's the part that we don't hear too much about, which is why I just did like 4 hours talking about
No, that's so
before the
interesting.
murders.
Yeah, like the build up to it and how he has built this cult, and also just the same kind of things. Like, it's a tiny bit of a tangent, but like I was just reading about there's an article about Marianne Wilson, who's the Cuckoo Bananas Democratic hopeful, and then Trump, and how they've all had these like power of positive thinking, like Scientology-ish kind of things, and how they have used it to like gain power and influence people. You know, it's very bizarre. Anyway, yeah, this is a weird one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Well-
I'm happy not to be in the murder episode as much, because that's some pretty grisly shit, man.
Yeah,
but I'm
no-
gonna be very happy to listen to it.
I'm not gonna have any guests on that episode. In fact, I'm going to
Oh, wow.
I'm going to let the parties involved tell you in their own words.
Ooh, nice.
Pretty much the whole thing on that episode. So
Awesome.
next week, if you enjoy the voice acting that's been going on, there wasn't a ton on this episode, but next week it's pretty much going to be all told from the perspective of those involved in the crimes.
So cool.
So look for that next week. Until then, please check out the website spookyas.com or spookyasship.com. They both take you to the same place. That is the show's blog page. You can find each and every episode there. You can also find us on social media. We are at spookyasshit on both Twitter and Instagram, and on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. And you can also join our secret closed group where you can talk about Manson without the weight of public judgment or future employers looking you up and seeing how much you talk about Manson online. That is the Spookaroos, spelled exactly the way it sounds. So type that in there and search us out and join us. I won't say
Not
join the
creepy.
family.
Yeah, please don't.
Until next time, don't be afraid.
Dream. The valley of death and I'll find you. Now is when on the sunshine beam. So bring only your perfection, for their love will surely be. No clothing, fear, or hunger. You can see, you can see, you can see.
Today's episode featured the voice talents of
Mary Widow as Susan Atkins.
Jackie Marchetti as Lynette Squeaky Fromy.
Catherine DePola as Leslie Van Houten.
Brian Toney as Tex Watson.
Quentin Capel as Charlie Manson.
Tristan Sapersky as Sharon Tate.
And of course, once again, I'd like to thank my friends Mac and Liv from Death by Champagne. And you can find them, just Google search that title, and I'm sure you can find them. They've got a bunch of social media, and they pop up all over the place. There was a lot more to the conversation that I had with them, but I had to cut the majority of it for time. But maybe someday I will post that as a bonus. So thank you once again, ladies.